The honeymoon is over. Joe Schmidt's three-match unbeaten streak is over. The Springboks demolishing the Wallabies 33 points to 7. And that perhaps not even the main course, which was followed across the ditch in Wellington with Argentina beating the All Blacks 38 points to 30. Razor Robertson's first loss in charge of the All Blacks. To dissect that and much more, Tony Harper, the boss here at the Raw, but also a great friend of the Raw. You can hear him on the 8-9 combo. Mr. Harry Jones.
How's it, guys? I'm really
Harry?
Really happy to talk to you about this wonderful occasion.
Well, we thought, the Springboks, they're back in town. For once, you're not live in the stadium itself, but H, we had to get you back given that South Africa, the world champions, really flexed their muscle. Tell us, what's your reaction off the top?
Okay, so for the Boks, there's always been this sort of Brisbane bogey hoodoo thing. So, it's Boks banish Brizzy bogey, and they do it big. But I do also had a bit of, empathy because I lived along with everyone else on the Roar this terrible year of the Wallabies. It felt kind of nice for this uptick. And then it always, at some point in the second half, I was like, yeah, this match just needs to be over now. And thankfully, I think Joe Schmidt put his finger on it. He said they never gave up. They kept trying. Even if there was card assists on the final try, it felt like the work in progress that we all knew the Wallabies were, right?
He obviously saw it coming as well. And I think we all saw it coming, didn't we, Harry? Like the 3-0 was a bit of a false dawn in a sense. The Wales teams weren't very good, and Georgia, we should be beating those guys. And he's tried not to talk up expectations. It was a fabulous day in Brisbane, and it's a shame you weren't here. It would have been nice for you to be walking around with about 500,000 of your fellow South Africans who were all parked in the beer queue in front of Christy and myself. We tried to get a pre-match beer, and it took a very long time. One of your brethren walked away with 12 beers on a tray. And then as soon as I got to the front, the tap ran out. So I said, look, forget it. Give me the beer next door. And she started to pour that, and that tap ran out as well. So I can safely say the Springboks drank Brisbane out of beer today.
Yeah, there was a big fuss about the sellout, how it went so quickly, and people had all their theories. And one theory was also like, oh, it's the world champions in town. No, it was just Safa's going to buy tickets. There was a humongous Safa contingent. Every time they would pan to the crowd, it was kind of odd. You were like, there's a lot more green than gold.
Well, I'm curious to get your perspective of what it looks like on the television coverage, because right the way throughout the day in Brisbane and waking up, you saw a lot of green jerseys, and that continued, and it didn't change at any point in time. I know that Ian Payton from the Herald and Jamie Pandaram from the News Corp were a couple of the earlier journalists here, and they were expecting at some point in time the gold jerseys to come, but they barely did. It was just drowned out by the sea of green.
I felt like I was in Johannesburg, except that I felt safe.
Yeah, and so like sometimes the producers can trick you with what they pan onto, but the sound is unmistakable. So when things would happen and you'd hear the roar, you could tell like this is legitimately not really an away game tonight. It was actually quite phenomenal. I did feel some sorrow and pain for our friend Shawnee Maloney, who had to say Sasha Feinberg Ngomazulu so many times, and I think he did a pretty good job actually.
He did an outstanding job. Okay, let's get into the game itself, because I don't think there was too many people that expected the Wallabies to win, and we've touched upon that with the fact that Joe Schmidt, he's the antithesis to Eddie Jones, who was smash and grab, who we're going to go to Pretoria and we're going to be the first side that wins there in 58 years and doing battle on the high veld there. But right from the outset, we saw inaccuracy from the Wallabies. Their kicking game was poor. They kicked long. They kicked often. They kicked from the base of the ruck, and it sailed right deep into the 22-metre line for the Springboks, and they managed to just come away with no pressure whatsoever and then just play a territory game. But from the scrum, from the collisions, the Wallabies just lost every single area, and they lost it early on, didn't they?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting. When I was watching this game, I was kind of curious about the Wales and Georgia results and what they meant. And one thing I worried about for my Wallaby friends was the defense. I thought if you're letting Wales and Georgia score those tries, I did think the Boks would score. I guess what I'm really more disappointed on was the attack. I didn't see that the Wallabies fired a shot really when the sides were evened up for the first 70 minutes. There were very rare forays into the 22 of the Boks. So I think that's the big fail taken away is building possession, gaining possession, working your way into 22. It just wasn't apparent. And like you said, Christy, there was no go forward ball. Like did not get over the gain line.
Well,
He did what he always does, but there was no helpers.
They weren't helped by a couple of times that they got possession, and then unfortunately they go off their feet at the breakdown. They're just too anxious to seal off the breakdown, and they end up flopping over the top. And you saw a couple of times they were penalised in that first half for that very reason. I know Morgan Turanui had some comments around how narrow they were in attack, but Harps, tell us more about what Morg said.
Well, he was talking about the narrowness. Michael Hooper also had some interesting comments around the kicking, and he felt that the kicking game wasn't as such a bad tactic. It's just how they produced it. And you had Jake Gordon there early on kicking a nothing kick in behind the line, and then a contestable that went way too far and was claimed for a mark there as well. It felt all of this is feeling a little Dave Rennie to me, where he talked about execution a lot and how
collisions a lot.
Yeah, and collisions a lot, and how these good men were you know, they had a lot of pride and they were playing with a lot of passion. He was very proud of them, but they've just not got the people. And you look at the lineup and array of stars on the South African side, and the way they attacked and the way they broke through the line and how they got that crowd behind them. And it was a really noticeable difference. And I know, I think Rassi was asked about the Ghetto law and what Australia might be thinking there as well. But I think it was another of those situations where you're starting to see that difference.
I asked Rassi that question. I said, look, he's the person that started looking outside the Republic, wasn't he, Harry? And that just switched the light changed instantly. Victory started coming. They beat Eddie Jones's English at home, and then they didn't stop winning. They went to New Zealand and they managed to come away with a win there. And H, what's your perspective on it? Because the Wallabies, they've only turned to Marika Koroibete for this Rugby Championship at this point in time. They didn't even select him physically. Joe Schmidt didn't think he was quite up to speed. But it looks like at times men against boys in that collision zone. And when you think about last year's lock pairing, or intended lock pairing for the World Cup, it was Will Skelton, it was Richie Arnold. Neither of those two are here. Perhaps Will Skelton later in the year, most likely on the spring tour, but no Rory Arnold, no Sean McMahon, no Samu Karevi. Did you feel like it was a Wallabies light?
Yeah, so you could actually bridge these two games of tonight in that the two teams that have overseas players, about half of the Springboks are overseas and they're all over the place. They're like dispersed wide and far. And Argentina, every single one of their players is now outside Argentina, and they won handily. You would say Argentina was almost unlucky not to have a bigger margin. So there is something to what you're saying. I think it's more in depth than it is on top quality. So a lot of Australians will say, okay, so tell me the 3 or 4 people you'd start. That's not really the point. The point is if you have a lock core and you've got, Lucan and you've got Nick, and then what's next? And if you said, oh, I'm bringing on Will Skelton, you'd say that's something to bring on. You could change the game up. Well, who's your 23rd player? Who's your 22nd player? So there's plenty of Aussie talent. The ones who are being paid the most money at the best clubs in the world are probably pretty good. And I think it's more about saving Super Rugby than it is about putting the best product in the field. I don't believe in the cohesion argument at top level when you can look at the World Cup and just see what won. It's from all over the place. So I think it's about this idea that we have to prop up Super Rugby. And just on Super Rugby, what I'd say is this was something Paul Cully wrote about, which was this is the first time in a while that, and maybe Rassi was a comment about it, was first time in a while that so many players from both sides, Australia and South Africa, hadn't seen each other in provincial or club competition. I don't know what the figure was, 33% or something. And so that also showed up because I was wondering who's going to be more surprised by the other. If you haven't played South African players in a while, what is the thing you're shocked about? And if you haven't played Australian players, what is the thing you're shocked about? And it turned out that the power and pace was the issue. So to your point, I think overseas players would have been more able to handle the power deficit. And I even think the pace. I mean, I think Koroibete would have been a bit better out there on the pace side. There were moments where it felt like one team in green was both quicker and stronger. And that's not a good combination when you're playing rugby.
Well, look, we all got a first look as a starter at Sasha playing at number 10 for the Springboks today. Feeding into that, how do you think that experience he's had with the Stormers contrasts with the experience maybe that Noah's had playing the games he's had in Super Rugby, and how has that maybe aligned what we saw tonight? Because he was super impressive. He's hitting the line.
Well, he responded so well off the back of that early missed penalty.
And everyone laughed at him. That was hilarious. The whole crowd was laughing at him. He had this big smile about it as well. Like you sat there and went, oh, they're laughing at this guy, this new guy. And he just shrugged it off and just nailed it after that, didn't he?
Yeah, he's a prodigy, and he has that athletic confidence where he knows for real. He knows that he won the genetic lottery. His genes are just so good. He can always shrug that off. He's like a really, really good golfer or tennis player that shanks one, and they don't care. They know the next one's going over. I thought he was fine. I thought it was actually a good match to throw him into, surrounded on both sides by extreme experience. He has the most experienced midfield in Bok history on this side of him. That pack had plenty of experience. I think having Kobus feeding him the balls probably a good move instead of putting Williams on. He missed a few kicks to touch. He had a few things he'd want to do over, and the coaches will be able to work with him now. But I think it wasn't a bad look to not put him in against the Ireland, but they played 15 against Ireland, and that was, had more space. At 10, you think you have very little space. I do think the Noah question is part of a larger question for Australian. Everyone's trying to say, who is going forward? Who's number 10? And it's sort of sad, I guess. You see Sasha go out there with 4 tests. He doesn't even play 10 for Stormers. He plays 12, utility back, 23. And so to look at him doing so well, all I'd say is, look, he was behind a dominant scrum. The line out was functioning like crazy. All the Boks were winning the breakdown and rucks. So, Sasha's going to look a little bit better than Noah. Noah and Jake were behind, a faltering pack. It's really hard to look good.
Yeah, it's a really good point because I said pre-game, and I said it even early in the match, that whoever was not going to play number 10 for the Wallabies this week was probably going to come out looking better. And that's the harsh reality of it. Like Ben Donaldson probably benefits by the fact that he didn't just get exposed and bullied and kick the ball away, and people start throwing their beer and switching off the TV remotes because they're sick of another Wallabies defeat. But Tom Liner comes on, plays only a handful of minutes at the end, obviously a great conversion from out wide, but instantly it's, well, let's get Tom Liner out on the field and maybe he starts next week in Perth. But the chopping and the changing, the lack of trust around the 10, it's systematic, but unfortunately it's going to come about unless you've got a forward pack that's going to give you front football.
Oh, absolutely. And I was looking at sort of who did well, who did okay, and who did poorly. And, it's interesting because I think there were some players like Nick Frost did okay. Lucan did okay, except he missed a lot of tackles. Rob Valentini did fine. Harry Wilson. It's just that the amalgamation of all that didn't add up to a hard pack. And at set piece, I mean, Isaac Kalea really struggled. Alan Alatoa really struggled in the scrum. Matt and I think Nasser as well missed some throws. And that kind of steamrolled it on it. And I think that, when Joe was trying to get back in the game, it just felt like every time the Wallabies were about to mount some sort of challenge, a set piece wobble, a drop ball, a kick that didn't go the right way. So it was just kind of, I'm with you, T. It felt like back to Rennie, where you're thinking a lot of effort, but not a lot of, actual efficiency. And so that's hard to fix in a week. I don't even know what you would do exactly besides some selection changes, because it's not like you're going to fix a scrum overnight.
No, and the thing is, Australia and Schmidt's talking about the basics and executing basics right. And for me, the big difference there was that South Africa have their basics. The core is really locked in. They can afford to do things like, double line out catches for a try, like that. And that was hilarious hearing Rassie talk about the old ball up the jumper afterwards and the old school and how he used to do that in the line out because, he didn't know what else to do or it was the safest way. And just seeing them enjoy their rugby and embellish, add layers on layers of it. You're looking at, you're not looking at a 3-chord band going out there and bashing out covers, are you? You're looking at someone that's really building this and they're really putting layers on top. And it was fun to watch, actually.
Yeah, and they were never tired. They were never tired. So there was this kind of age-old trope. They go, tire the big boys out. Like, they didn't look like they were ever going to get tired. I thought that was a bad idea. I thought Wallabies' best odds to hold the score down and have a chance was to grind it into the dirt and make it a kind of a dirty game, a slow game. I really think also, Tony, to your point, there were some innovations around on the line out where Chesson Colby would come in playing at 9, and then they shifted Kubas Ranach to second or third receiver, just giving up on having a blindside token person over there, and it made an overlap on every backline move. I mean, just little twists. They might have been Tony Brown, little twists and turns that they did. It was really interesting to watch.
Yeah, like Tony Bill Williams afterwards said that he loved the innovation that the side's bringing at the moment. And he said, I feel like they've grown an extra leg since the Rugby World Cup. You've watched them a lot closer. Do you feel like there's an improvement even on top of what they did in Paris last year?
Yeah, there's some technical shifts. So they've got Peter Steph Toy playing in the trams on the right. They got Sia Khaleesi playing trams on the left. They were monkeying around with what to do at 8. And so they put Elrak Lowe in there, who's actually quite a fleet guy. And I'd never seen him in test rugby get this much airtime. And so now you have the 3 stretch loose forwards. That's not Bok ball. Like, they've always hunted in a pack before. So that's a change. As far as who hangs back to receive kicks, it's not the same old. I think Tony's trying to launch counterattacks off of that. So a couple of times Jake looked bad. I think Noah did too on kicks, but it was because the Boks were playing kicks differently. So there's a kind of a chess move here. I would think with a week, Joe's going to rip up some stuff and have a better showing. You would think he has to on that. I don't think he's going to hang kicks way out there and have counterattacks launched against him. I don't know what he does, though, about set piece. I just, Christy, what do you think? What's the fix at the line out? Because you only have a certain number of hookers and you only have a certain number of jumpers and callers. What do? You just go to the front and take your medicine?
Well, look, a few of us ran into Michael Hooper on Friday night and we were having a drink down on the water there in the Brisbane River. And Hoops thought, and a few of us agreed that you can't necessarily beat the Springboks at their own game, but given how light they are, why not play a Lukan Salakai-Loto at 6? He's previously done it a fair bit. Start another big guy in the second row because they're just too light at the moment. And whether or not Taniela Tupou features next week, it's probably unlikely. There's all sorts of thoughts that he might be back at a funeral next week following the tragic loss of his father. But Angus Bell, when does he return? It's probably a bit early, maybe a bit premature, given all his foot injuries, to be able to throw him in just within a couple of weeks to try to solve a creaky scrum. So it's not an easy fix for Joe Schmidt. He's even said it. He said it down in the press conference that it's not going to be solved in a week's time, and it's a long-term plan here. But the thing is, Joe Schmidt doesn't have a long time until next year's Lions series.
No,
it's a year away. So as much as he wants to be philosophical and around picking from home, unfortunately, Joe Schmidt might not be here beyond next year unless he has a good result against the British and Irish Lions.
Yeah, that's fair. I did think it was worth the experiment that he had, Carlo Tizzano up there, but he looked small, didn't he? He didn't look like he had the heft. He kind of looked like what people had said for ages about Michael Hooper, but without the dynamism. I also thought there was Reimer, when he came on, had the same kind of problem in that he just was easily shifted. Look, it's a big step up. The Boks were playing Ireland in some of the most brutal test matches I have ever seen in my life. I was there for both of them, and it was almost sickening to hear the thuds, and it was just a different level. And I think it was just a shock. I think there was a bit of that 21-0 first half had a lot of feeling of, whoa, what just happened? I mean, I hate those interviews. He coming off the field and they're trying to grab Harry Wilson and say, what happened? Because I mean, you're barely alive, breathing, but you had that feeling of like, wow, that was a step up in whatever intensity.
I completely agree. And the fact that the little guys like your Kurtley Aranzas can just look and run a mark within like that Springbok setup where they've just got so many giants of the game. And then
that try he scored where he just scooped up a loose ball and no one got near him.
Well, Alan Olatul misses the tackle, and it kind of summed up where the Wallabies are at. They're kind of trying to catch up, aren't they? And they've still got a little while to go. The other player that I think will join the Wallabies camp over the next week or so is Brandon Paenga-Amosa. I don't expect him to play against the Springboks next week, but he's a guy that's got a fair bit of size to him. He's played in France for the last couple of years, done well with Montpellier. So there are some people coming back. Fraser McWright, Liam Wright, whether or not they feature against Argentina remains to be seen. But a 5-1 comprehensive victory over the Wallabies in Brisbane. We'll move on to Perth next week. But with the segue of talking about Argentina, wow, what did we just witness there in Wellington? 38-30, a remarkable victory. Augustine Creevy with the try. And then some colourful language at the end to sum up their victory harps.
And no one over there is saying that it wasn't well-deserved. Ian Payton of the Sydney Morning Herald suggested that the Kiwi Hacks might decide that it's all our fault that they've lost to Argentina because we're so rubbish at Super Rugby and not giving them a proper challenge. So nice line from Pato there. They made their own bet, he says.
I actually thought that Argentina was well deserved. I mean, I watched that match and thought I was actually surprised it was even that close. I think that's the most points Argentina had ever scored against the All Blacks. I think I heard that right. That's a lot of points to leak to Argentina. That would be Razor's main concern, is that, fixing the defensive leakiness. I was also before this championship who was under the most pressure on these kind of new coaching setups. I mean, Rossi's not new, but he has Tony Brown and Jerry Flannery to work in. I thought it was Razor, because Razor's victories over England were they were just very tenuous. I didn't feel like there was ever any authority placed on it. And then I said, what if? And the what if was just kind of a throw out there. What if they lose to the Pumas? And then they just happened. And I know the New Zealand public enough to say you don't get a whole lot of wiggle room from that. I mean, I know what happened to Foster. It got really high and intense. So I would think Razor has to deliver next week.
Well, he certainly does. And I imagine that Ian Foster would be sitting back home with a glass of red wine. He's probably text Steve Hansen going, you know what? Unlucky, Razor.
It ain't that easy. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
It's not that easy.
I'm not sure if the gambling company supercomputer that sent me a press release this week actually drinks red wine, but if it does, it probably is as well. It suggested that the Wallabies for the wooden spoon, and you would have been thinking, if you were Joe Schmidt, South Africa and All Blacks twice are very hard, but you would be looking for that win against Argentina or a couple of wins there. But after that, and traveling away to play in front of their fans, that's going to be tough. The supercomputer suggested the Wallabies were going to win one. Do you see that happening, or do you see a wooden spoon as maybe a fait accompli? And I'm mindful of the fact that listeners to this podcast think I'm a negative.
You are. You're English. Anyway. It's in your blood.
I was born in England. I don't consider myself English. I consider myself a man of the world.
No, so All Blacks have to play 2 in South Africa, and there's a very good chance that they would drop both. So then you have this sort of Bledisloe backlash, trauma response. And so no one's really thinking that they would, go quietly, because then you'd have All Blacks playing for their coach, because if the All Blacks arrive, with that kind of record, then they're in the wooden spoon race. So they don't want that. Yeah, I think Wallabies are staring at that possibility. You would think against Argentina, so Argentina might have just played their best match. So we'll put it that way. Like there is a possibility with the Pumas of that kind of, okay, we're good now. We did something historic. So that's where you would think could happen. And in Perth, I think the problem is that there's just fundamentals here that are hard to shift in a week. So you would look for the wins for the Wallabies to come at the expense of the Pumas.
Well, either way, a 44 points to 6 turnaround from last year at the World Cup semi-final, where the All Blacks just blew the Pumas away at the Stade de France. Certainly not the case tonight. H, so good to have you join the pod, and looking forward to your copy throughout the week. I know that you've submitted an analysis story up on site. So we'll be sure to have you again on the pod soon, perhaps even next week. Until then, enjoy your time with the 8-9 podcast with Brett Mackay, but also Tony Harper. Thanks for your coverage as well. A disappointing evening, but perhaps one that wasn't a great surprise here at Suncorp Stadium. But 52,000 people here to watch it. The vast majority, or at least half anyway, South Africans. They enjoy and rejoice from a comprehensive victory. I'm Christy Doran. Thanks for your time on the Raw Rugby Podcast.
Cheers, guys.